I live in a city called São Paulo, and we are 20 million people there. And I was born there many years ago. And I've seen how fear can actually become a disease. Like my parents' place used to have like these small walls, and then the neighbor built like a big wall. And then my parents said, ooh, I have to build my high wall too. And then they put up some electric wires, and my parents were like, oh, we have to do that too. I mean, there is violence in the city, but you can see that it is actually contagious, and that the response that we human beings have to the perception of violence is much larger than the actual violence. So that was the beginning of it, and of course what started to happen with the world when we first created the idea of the film, and that eventually evolved into something even more drastic, was really the real meaning behind the whole story.
Com a vida na grande cidade se tornando cada vez mais arriscada, o que será de nós? Como sair de casa? A gente põe pé fora.
It did have an impact as far as we realized that we were talking about the right stuff, but we didn't change the story much. We changed just normal stuff, like we changed the script as we usually change scripts when we are producing them. But the story and the concept didn't change much. And it's kind of funny, you mentioned Donald Trump, and the villain in the film was actually inspired by Donald Trump before he was even a candidate. And when he got to be a candidate, we were like, oh, what does this mean? And then he got to be the president, and we're like, I guess we were looking in the right direction, but in terms of actually changing the story, it didn't change much, no. Well, there is a lot of symbolism behind the pigeons. It's mostly pigeons in the film, right? It's the pigeons are like a very powerful symbol in many ways. They were like the earliest means of communication, of distant communication through carrier pigeons. They're also the symbol of the Holy Ghost in Christianity. And they are also like, they symbolize peace. And at the same time, if you're a parent and your children are about to touch a pigeon, you just go crazy saying, oh, they are dirty, don't touch them. So there's this contradiction I try to develop in the film, this paradox of this beautiful symbol and this dirty side of society, this more like, I don't know, animal-like spirit. And also there is something that I like about the pigeons, which is that they have been living in cities together with human beings from the start. For as long as there have been cities, there have been pigeons together with us, but keeping their distance. So I imagine them as these privileged observers of the human experience, and the whole idea that there is this lost memory that, or rather a memory that we chose to forget. So it's all that combined. So the whole solution, they're not really the solution, it's just they're like just an icon of the fact that we have forgotten something very important, which is how and why we have to come together to face problems and to face fear.
O Boiô sempre teve os olhos arregalados. Então eu não sei se ele nasceu com a doença do medo ou se ele era assim mesmo, com os olhos grandes.
Esse mundo! Rufus! Rufus!
We had a big crew for Brazilian standards, and because of the fact that I'm not able to draw anything, I really had to rely on the talent of a lot of very, very special and talented people. So we came up with the idea of using expressionism as a big reference for the film, because we had the challenge of telling the story about fear to a very young audience. So it could not be too frightening, otherwise the kids would just walk out of the movie theaters. So we came up with two different strategies. One was expressionism. The whole setting and the backgrounds and the art is very expressionistic. And also the music, because we had to make the kids feel the fear, otherwise the impact of the movie wouldn't be very efficient. And then in terms of techniques, what we did, because we had a very tight budget for the size of the project, we used very simple digital techniques. We used Toon Boom, which is used for TV mostly, but for the animation. But we used it in a way that the animators could actually draw a lot when needed. So in action scenes, so there is a lot of hand drawing. And we also made the drawings without regular shapes, so that it was easier to draw in these moments.
Meu pai pediu a minha ajuda para segurar uma alavanca. Só que eu...
And in terms of the backgrounds, we had expressionism as a reference, especially the painters, expressionist painters. We wanted to use oil paint, which was very much used for expressionism, and it also gives a texture and a feeling to the film. Also, again, to portray this environment of fear. So we would not have been able to use oil paint throughout the film because it would have been too expensive. So what we did, we mixed Photoshop we created our own library with oil paint strokes, and we imported that into the computer so that we could mix actual like Photoshop strokes with oil paint strokes, so that you get a feeling you don't really know if it's all oil or not. And on top of that, the special effects we used during compositing, we used frame by frame oil paint on glass on top of everything. So like most of the smoke and the textures of water, sometimes cars driving by, the lights and everything, we give touches of oil paint so that the actual texture of the paint would show up and create a very peculiar and unique look.